She was 2 years old. She didn't know what a mafia boss was. She didn't know what a death warrant was, or a war, or a massacre. She didn't know that the hands that buckled her shoes every morning had once ordered executions before breakfast, without losing an appetite. All she knew was, when she cried, he came. When she fell, he caught her. When she said appa, the Korean word for daddy, he stopped whatever he was doing. Every single time, without exception. She had tamed the most feared man in Seoul with 2 syllables and a smile. And for nearly 2 years, it had worked. He had buried the monster, changed his name, moved cities, learned to make rice porridge from YouTube, burned it 12 times before he got it right, built her a yellow bedroom in a quiet street in Busan, far from everything that had tried to destroy them both. He thought he had won. He hadn't. Because you don't get to walk away from 20 years of blood and violence just because a baby changed your heart. The world doesn't work that way. The past doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It just waits, patient and quiet and absolutely certain, until you finally, truly believe you're safe. Then it sends someone to your door. Not a criminal this time, not an assassin or a rival with a gun and old scores to settle. A woman with a government folder and a very polite question about your daughter's birth certificate. And the most dangerous man in Seoul realizes, with the cold clarity of someone who has survived everything except this, that he has absolutely no idea how to fight her. This is part 2. But before we begin, if you're new here and you haven't seen part 1 yet, stop right now and go watch it first. The link is in the description. You need the full story, trust me. And if this channel has ever given you a story that stayed with you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. We are building something here, one story at a time. Every single subscriber makes the next story possible. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to us. We also just launched our membership, and our very first member has already joined us. Welcome. Seriously, you are the reason this keeps going. If you want to join them, early access to part 3 before anyone else sees it, extended scenes that didn't make the main video, behind-the-scenes story notes, and the chance to suggest future stories directly to us, the join button is right below this video. Your support is what keeps this alive. Now, let's get into it. The restaurant opened at 7. Min-ho was always there by 5:30, which the first supplier to arrive every morning, an elderly man named Mr. Guak, who delivered vegetables and had never once asked why the restaurant owner already looked like he'd been awake for hours, had simply accepted as the way of things. Some men were early risers. Some men had things chasing them into the morning. Mr. Guak was too old and too wise to wonder which kind Kim Sung-jin was. The restaurant had 8 tables. Min-ho knew this was not enough to build a real living, but it was enough to build a real day. And for the first time in 25 years, a real day was what he wanted. He had learned the menu through trial and error that would have humiliated him in any other context. A man who had once negotiated billion-dollar deals with a bullet lodged in his ribs had burned soup so badly that Mrs. Han from next door had come to the door asking if everything was all right. Mrs. Han, 63 years old, recently widowed, with a laugh like a door swinging open, and an instinct for other people's pain that she never once weaponized. She had appeared at his door 6 days after they moved in, carrying a container of kimchi and the unspoken knowledge that a man with a toddler and shadows under his eyes probably needed feeding. Min-ho had thanked her with the careful courtesy of a man unaccustomed to kindness offered without calculation. She had patted his arm and said he looked tired. He had not known what to do with that, so he had said nothing. She had come back the next day anyway. That was 18 months ago. Now, Michelle called her Halmoni, not because Min-ho had taught her to, he hadn't, he wouldn't presume, but because Michelle had arrived at the word herself with the same absolute certainty she applied to all her conclusions. Mrs. Han was Halmoni, Min-ho was Appa. The restaurant's tabby cat, who had no name and belonged to no one, and ate the scraps Min-ho left by the back door every morning, was Baby. These were facts. Michelle did not negotiate facts. She was 22 months old. She had her own strong opinions about the order in which vegetables could be eaten on a plate, the correct way to hold a spoon, and which of her stuffed animals required an apology after being dropped. She ran everywhere. Min-ho had not fully appreciated, before Michelle, the sheer sustained velocity of a healthy toddler. She moved through the world like someone who had recently discovered legs and intended to use every possible surface of them. He spent a significant portion of each day simply following her at a slight jog. She had his intensity and none of his darkness, which he counted every single day as the greatest miracle he'd ever witnessed. The house was 3 blocks from the restaurant. 2 bedrooms, a small yard where Min-ho had built a wooden sandbox because Michelle had become briefly obsessed with sand and then moved on to an obsession with rocks, which she collected and arranged and occasionally presented to Min-ho as gifts with the gravity of a head of state presenting a treaty. He kept every one. They were lined up on the windowsill of his bedroom in order of presentation. He did not examine too closely what this said about him. Michelle's room was yellow. He had painted it himself, badly, at 2 in the morning while she slept in the living room in a borrowed playpen, because he'd wanted it done before she saw it. The paint had dripped in one corner, and he'd had to redo it 3 times. It was still slightly uneven if you looked closely. He looked closely every night when he checked on her before bed, and every night he thought, "I painted that. I made that for her." The smallness of the pride embarrassed him. He didn't care. In the locked box above the refrigerator, his gun, checked every night, still there, still loaded, safety on. He hoped, with the consistency of a man who had started praying again and wasn't entirely sure who he was praying to, that he would never need it. In the drawer beside his bed, 27 small stones, 4 pieces of orange peel dried to paper, 3 carefully folded napkins, 1 smooth piece of sea glass, and a single yellow crayon stub Michelle had handed him one morning with the announcement that it was broken and therefore his. He had accepted it solemnly. He would sooner throw away his own hand. He had nightmares. He still flinched at sudden sounds. He still positioned himself in restaurants with his back to the wall and sightlines to every exit. He still ran calculations in the background of conversations, escape routes, threat assessments, the number of steps between himself and Michelle at any given moment. But the nightmares were less frequent than they had been. The calculations were quieter, and some mornings, not every morning, but some, he woke before the alarm and lay in the dark and thought, "This is mine. This small, careful, imperfect life is mine, and I did not deserve it, and I am going to keep it." He was thinking exactly that on the Tuesday night before Han Soo-yeon walked through his door. He should have known better than to think it. She arrived on a Wednesday at 10:45 in the morning, between the breakfast rush and the lunch service, which Min-ho later understood was not an accident. She had timed it to find him without the buffer of a crowd. He clocked her the moment she came through the door. Wrong body language for a customer. Too deliberate, too studied in her casualness, the way people moved when they were trying not to look like they were looking. Gray blazer, dark trousers, the kind of comfortable shoes that meant a lot of time on her feet. A government folder tucked under one arm. She was in her mid-30s, with a composed face and eyes that took in the room methodically, the way a person did when they had been trained to notice things. Min-ho was behind the counter. He set down the cloth he had been using to dry glasses and waited. She found Michelle first. Michelle was in her playpen behind the counter, engaged in a focused negotiation with a plastic cow, explaining something at length in the half-language of a 22-month-old, a mix of real words and sounds that Min-ho had become fluent in over the past year and a half. The woman's eyes stayed on Michelle for 2 seconds longer than a customer's would. Min-ho filed this. "Good morning," the woman said, approaching the counter. Her voice was even, professional. She had done this before. "I'm looking for Kim Sung-jin." "That's me," Min-ho said. She produced a business card and set it on the counter. Han Soo-yun, Seoul Metropolitan Child Welfare Division. A phone number, a case file reference number at the bottom that Min-ho did not look at, but absorbed completely in his peripheral vision. Mr. Kim, I'm a senior social worker with the Seoul Child Welfare Division. I've been assigned to follow up on a documentation inquiry regarding, she glanced at Michelle, then back at him, your daughter, Michelle. In the playpen, Michelle had concluded her argument with the plastic cow and moved on to introducing it to a stuffed rabbit. She made a sound of welcome on the rabbit's behalf. What kind of inquiry? Min-ho said. It was not a question. His voice was flat, and even in the way it became when every other thing inside him was the opposite. Soo-yeon opened the folder. She did not slide it across the counter. She held it, as if understanding that creating distance was a kindness she could offer. There are some irregularities in Michelle's adoption documentation that have been flagged for review. I want to be clear that this is a standard procedural follow-up. She paused. It doesn't necessarily indicate any wrongdoing. The word necessarily did a great deal of work in that sentence. Min-ho heard every syllable of it. What kind of irregularities? He said. I'd prefer to go through the specifics during a formal visit, if you're agreeable. I'd like to schedule something for early next week when we can sit down properly. She looked at him steadily. She was good at this. The particular stillness of someone who had learned to give people room to react without showing they were watching the reaction. I'd also like to observe Michelle in her home environment at some point, which is entirely routine. She's 2 years old, Min-ho said. The words came out before he could modulate them. She's happy. She's healthy. Something moved in Soo-yeon's face, not softening exactly, but a small acknowledgement. I can see that, she said, and then quietly, that matters, Mr. Kim. He scheduled the meeting for the following Monday. He watched her walk out the door with the particular stillness of a man who has survived 20 years in a world that ended people, and he did not move until she had turned the corner and disappeared from view. Then he went to the playpen. Michelle looked up at him, thrust the plastic cow in his direction, and announced, Cow! I see it, he said. Cow hungry, she said. I'll get the cow something to eat, he said. He picked her up and held her for a long time, standing in the empty restaurant, while Michelle patted his shoulder with one small hand in the absent-minded, generous way she had when she sensed he needed something she couldn't name. He had survived Choi. He had survived a bullet that missed his heart by 2 centimeters. He had survived the worst night of his life and rebuilt something real from nothing. Han Soo-yeon had a folder with a case file number, and he was more frightened than he had ever been. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table after Michelle was in bed and went through everything Kang-joon had built for him, every document, every record, every carefully constructed thread of Kim Sung-jin's invented history, with the systematic precision of a man looking for the exact place a wall has a crack. He found it at 3 a.m. The deceased former lover listed on the Michelle's adoption paperwork, a woman named Yoon Ji-young, cited as Michelle's biological mother through an undocumented prior relationship, had a death certificate dated 8 months before Michelle's listed birth date. Kang-joon had assembled this history quickly, under pressure, with limited resources. He had built it to withstand a casual glance, not a dedicated investigator with 22 months and a case file number. Min-ho sat with this for a long time. Then he went to the drawer beside his bed and stood looking at the row of small stones on the windowsill for several minutes. He picked up the piece of sea glass, smooth, pale green, the one Michelle had found on the beach 2 months ago and carried all the way home in her fist, refusing to put it down even when she fell asleep in the car, her small fingers still curled around it. She had given it to him at the door. "It's yours, Appa." He hadn't asked why. He never asked why. He just took it. He put the sea glass back. He went to the locked box above the refrigerator. He opened it. He did not take out the gun. He just looked at it for a moment, the weight of what it represented, the world it came from. And then he closed the box and went back to the kitchen and opened his laptop. He left a message in an online forum, an obscure photography community that had not posted new content in 4 years, which he and Kang Jun had used as a dead drop channel in another life. The message was a comment on a photograph of clouds, 3 numbers embedded in the text, a location, a time. He closed the laptop and sat with the silence of the house around him. From down the hall came the sound of Michelle's breathing through the baby monitor. She still had one, though she was almost 2, because he was not ready to not have one. The rhythm of it was the steadiest thing he knew. In, out, in, out. Safe. He made coffee. He sat with it until it went cold. He made another one. At 6 a.m., before the alarm, Michelle woke up calling for him. He was in her room before the second call. She stood in her crib, arms up, sleep-warm and certain of her welcome. "Appa," she said, in the tone of someone reporting a simple fact. "You exist, I exist, I would like to be held." He lifted her. She grabbed a fistful of his shirt and put her head on his shoulder. "Morning, baby," he said. "Morning," she said, and then, "Hungry." "Of course you are." He made her breakfast with her on his hip, one-handed, the way he'd learned before she could walk. She supervised from his arm, pointing at things and naming them with the authority of a senior official conducting an inspection. Egg, spoon, cup, appa hair. He let her narrate. He needed her voice this morning more than she knew. The forum would take 24 hours. He had until Monday. He had survived worse with less time. He told himself this, standing in the kitchen with his daughter on his hip, the morning light coming through the window, the cat outside waiting by the back door. He almost believed it. The message came back within 6 hours, which told Min-ho what he'd suspected. Kang Jun was not merely watching from a distance, he was close. They met in a small jjajangmyeon restaurant in an Incheon suburb, neutral territory, chosen by the old protocol that Min-ho had thought he'd retired. He arrived first and positioned himself with his back to the wall, and felt a small brim flicker of recognition at how natural it still was. Some things didn't unlearn. Kang Jun came through the door at exactly the agreed time, wearing clothes that would have been invisible in any crowd, and sat down across from Min-ho with the ease of a man who had spent 15 years conducting difficult conversations in uncertain circumstances. He had more gray in his hair than when Min-ho had last seen him 3 months ago. He looked, Min-ho thought, like a man carrying something heavy that he had simply decided to carry. "The Ji-young problem," Min-ho said, without preamble. Kang Jun nodded slowly. He had already known. "I found the date discrepancy 6 months after I built the file. I should have flagged it then." "Why didn't you?" "Because the correction requires filing through official channels." Kang Jun looked at him steadily. "And filing through official channels means visibility. Anyone with access to Seoul's welfare and law enforcement databases, anyone who is specifically watching for your name or any variation of it, or any connected document trail, gets a flag." The food arrived. Neither of them touched it. "How long?" Min-ho said. "Between filing and a flag being visible? 48 hours, depending on who's watching." Kang Jun paused. "And some people have been watching consistently for 2 years. Min-ho already knew which people, the remnants of Choi's old alliances, absorbed now into a larger network. Men who hadn't forgotten that Park Min-ho had broadcast their world to journalists and half the underworld, who had used the chaos of his disappearance to claim his territories, and who now had a considered interest in ensuring he stayed dead. "There's a second option," Kang Jun said. "Tell me." "There's a man named Lee Jae-won,
former low-level associate. He ran messages for your operation for about a year, 8 years ago, and then left cleanly. You let him go. You didn't have to. Kang Jun turned his tea glass on the table. He's been clean for 7 years, runs a printing business in Daejeon. He owes you the clean exit he got, though he's never known the name of who gave the order. What does he have that I need? He has a cousin inside the Seoul welfare system, not Soo-yeon's department, a different branch, administrative records. Kang Jun met his eyes. If the date discrepancy and Ji Young's documentation were corrected from within the administrative record, not through a new filing, but as a quiet clerical amendment to an existing one, there would be no new flag. It would simply be a corrected error. Min-ho thought about this. You want me to approach a man I haven't spoken to in 8 years and ask him to involve his cousin in falsifying a government record. I want to approach him on your behalf, through the old courtesy, not through pressure. Kang Jun was careful with the distinction. He can say no. If he does, we find another way. And if Soo-yeon keeps investigating regardless, if she finds something else? Kang Jun was quiet for a moment. Then, precisely, then you tell her the truth, all of it. And you trust that a woman who chose this work, who has spent 22 months trying to protect one child, might be capable of understanding why a man did what you did. Min-ho looked at his untouched food. That is the most dangerous thing you've ever said to me, he said. I know, Kang Jun said. I said it anyway. Min-ho drove back to Busan in the dark. 3 hours of road and silence. When he got home, Michelle was long asleep. He went to her room and stood in the doorway. The yellow walls, the row of stuffed animals arranged along the windowsill with a seriousness he recognized as hereditary. The small, still shape of her under the blanket. Trust. The word sat in him like a stone. He had not trusted anyone. Really, completely, without calculation, in 25 years. Not until a 10-pound baby in an alley had done it first, and shown him by example that it was possible. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but in the morning he called Kang Jun and said, "Talk to Jaewon." Soo-yeon came on Monday as scheduled, and she came to the house this time, not the restaurant. Min-ho had cleaned everything twice, which he recognized as the behavior of a man who understood that environments were read as text and wanted this one to say the right things. Michelle's room, books organized by size on the lower shelf, within her reach. The drawer of stones and sea glass, which he left exactly as it was real, and real was what they needed. The kitchen, functional, a little cluttered, the crayon drawings Michelle had made and he had taped to the refrigerator. He had not taped them up for the visit. They had been there for months. That was the point. Michelle greeted Soo-yeon at the door with the directness of someone who had not yet learned social hesitation. She looked up at her for a long moment, assessment complete, and then turned and walked back into the living room and sat down next to her block set, which Min-ho understood as an invitation if he'd ever seen one. Soo-yeon watched this and wrote something in her folder. They sat at the kitchen table while Michelle played. Soo-yeon went through her questions with a methodical thoroughness that Min-ho respected against his will. She was good, she was careful, and she was clearly not someone who could be deflected with half-truths or redirected by charm. She asked about Michelle's routine, her development, her medical history, her social interactions. She asked about Mrs. Han. She asked about childcare arrangements when Min-ho was at the restaurant. He answered everything he could answer truthfully, and he answered it without embellishment. Then she opened to a tabbed section of the folder. Mr. Kim, I want to ask you about Michelle's birth documentation, specifically the listing of Yoon Ji Young as Michelle's biological mother. Yes, Min-ho said. Miss Yeon's death certificate is dated, she cited the date, Michelle's birth certificate lists a birth date that is 8 months after Miss Yan's recorded death. She looked up from the folder. Her voice was even, not accusatory. I'm sure you understand why this requires an explanation. Across the table, Min-ho held the silence for 3 full seconds. He was calculating, the old way, rapidly, exit routes and variables and risk assessment. Then he stopped calculating. The documentation has an error, he said. I'm aware of it. I've been in the process of having it corrected. He met her eyes. I can provide you with evidence of that process within the week. She wrote something. I appreciate that. She did not close the folder. Mr. Kim, I want to be straightforward with you because I think that serves Michelle better than anything else. She paused. I've been doing this work for 11 years, and the things I noticed in this house, the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the drawer of stones she's given you, the way she came to the door and looked at me and then looked at you before she decided how to feel about me, those things tell me something real about who she is to you. Another pause, careful. But my job requires me to verify documentation, not to interpret love. And the documentation right now has a problem. From the living room came the sound of blocks being stacked with great concentration, then the sound of them falling, and Michelle's voice. Uh-oh! And then the sound of her stacking them again. I understand, Min-ho said. I'm going to need the corrected documentation within 10 days, Soo-yan said. And I'm going to need a formal declaration of how Michelle came into your care, not the official version. She looked at him directly, and there was something in her gaze, not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of a willingness to hear something real. The actual version. Min-ho looked at his hands on the table, hands that had done things this woman would never forgive if she knew all of them. Hands that had also, in a Seoul alley on a rainy night 2 years ago, picked up a dying child and refused to put her down. I'll need a few days, he said. You have 10, Soo-yan said. She closed the folder. She stood, and then doing something that was either professional habit or the first small human gesture she'd allowed herself, she paused in the doorway of the living room, looking at Michelle still building her tower. She's very focused, Soo-yan said, almost to herself. She gets that from me, Min-ho said. Something flickered across Soo-yan's face. Not quite a smile, the shape of one, possibly, if the light was right. She left. Min-ho stood in the doorway of the living room and watched Michelle's tower reach 5 blocks, then 6. She turned and looked at him with the pride of an architect unveiling a masterpiece. Appa, look, she said. I see it. It's the tallest one yet. She beamed. Then she knocked it down herself, because that was equally the point. He had 10 days. Kang Jun needed to reach Jaewon, the documentation needed to move, and Min-ho needed to figure out how much truth a woman who had spent 11 years protecting children from men like him could be expected to hold. Kang Jun reached Jaewon on the 3rd day. The answer came back through the forum in the same coded format. The cousin would not help. Not out of fear, not out of malice, out of exactly the kind of honest, professional integrity that Min-ho in another life would have recognized as a liability, and in this life could only respect. She had taken an oath. She would not break it for a stranger's favor, no matter what debt her cousin might feel he owed. Min-ho read the message at 2 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee and the quiet of the house around him. He sat with the closed door of that option for a long time. Then he went to his bedroom and opened the drawer beside his bed. Not for the stones. Behind them, in the back of the drawer, was an envelope he had placed there the day they moved into the house and had not touched since. Brown paper, sealed with tape that had dried and slightly yellowed. His handwriting on the front, in the unsteady script of a man who had been writing by hospital lamplight and expected never to finish the sentence. For Michelle, when she is old enough to ask.
He had written 3 letters the night before he walked into Choi's warehouse. One for Kang Jun, delivered. One for his family, which had no destination because he believed his family was dead. One for Michelle, which had lived in this drawer, and before that in Kang Jun's keeping, untouched. He did not open it now. He was not ready. He wasn't sure he would ever be ready, and that was perhaps the point. You did not write a letter like that intending to read it yourself. You wrote it so that someone else could understand you after you were gone. The fact that he was still here to not read it was, he supposed, the whole story. He put it back. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and thought about what Kang Jun had said. Tell her the truth. Trust that a woman who chose this work might be capable of understanding. He thought about the first morning after finding Michelle, when he had searched the internet for formula with blood-stained hands, feeling like the most ridiculous man alive, feeling something cracking open in his chest. He had not understood then what was cracking. He understood now. It was everything he had built to keep the world out. And it had cracked not because someone had broken it, because a 10-pound baby had simply reached up and grabbed his finger and held on. He thought about Dr. Yuna, who had died with her hands pressed against the nursery door, who had loved Michelle with every uncomplicated cell of her, who deserved better than a death in a hallway, and who had chosen it anyway because some people were simply, fundamentally, good. He thought about Su Yun, sitting across from him at his kitchen table with a folder of evidence and a willingness he hadn't expected. That small, careful opening she had offered. The actual version. He had 7 days left. He picked up his phone. He did not call Kang Jun. He opened the notes application and began, very slowly, to write. Not the whole truth, not yet, but the beginning of it. The shape of how a man who had broken everything could hold one small thing together by sheer force of changed will. The words came harder than anything he'd written in his life, including the letters, those he had written to be read after his death. This one he was writing to be spoken out loud in a small Busan restaurant to a woman who might or might not decide that Michelle deserved better. He wrote until 4 in the morning. Then he went to check on Michelle. She was on her back, arms flung out to the sides, the complete physical trust of a child who had never once woken up and found herself uncared for. He stood in the doorway. The yellow walls held the dark gently. "I'm going to try something I've never done," he told her sleeping form. "I'm going to tell someone the truth and see what happens." She breathed in, out, in. He took that as an answer. He called Su Yan on the morning of the 7th day and asked if they could meet at the restaurant that evening, after closing. He had something to tell her, he said, about how Michelle came into his care, the actual version. A pause on the line. Then, "I'll be there at 8. He told Mrs. Han he needed the evening, that it was a family matter, that he was sorry for the short notice. Mrs. Han said she'd have Michelle for as long as he needed and sent him home with a container of doenjang jjidae or his dinner, which he set on the counter untouched, and then ate at 6 o'clock because he needed to do something with his hands. He cleaned the restaurant. He set 2 cups on the table nearest the window, table 2, not table 3, where Su Yan had first sat. He wanted it to feel different. He did not examine why this mattered. It mattered. He sat and went over the notes he had written at 4 in the morning, the beginning of a truth arranged into the shape of something a human being could say out loud. He had not written it all. He had written what was necessary. The alley, the rain, the baby who weighed almost nothing and looked at him like he was something worth trusting. His own wounds, which he did not explain. The frantic, stumbling, entirely graceless first weeks of feeding her and holding her, and learning that a man who controlled billion-dollar criminal enterprises was completely helpless in the face of a screaming infant. The way she smiled at him, the first real smile, and how something cracked in his chest that had been sealed shut for a long time.
the decision to keep her, the fear that came with it. Dr. Yuna, who loved Michelle honestly and died for it. The documents and why they were imperfect, and what he had tried and failed to correct. He did not say, "I was the most feared criminal in Seoul." He did not say, "The empire I built on violence and death." He did not say, "The men who wanted to use my daughter to break me are the smallest part of why I am sitting here." He said, "I found a child who was dying, and I could not leave her. Everything I have done since is an attempt to be worthy of the fact that she is alive." Su-Yan arrived at 8 exactly. She was in a different blazer, dark blue, and she had a smaller folder this time, almost an afterthought. She sat down, she looked at the 2 cups, she looked at him. "You don't have to do this tonight," she said, "if you found a documentation solution." "The documentation solution fell through," Minho said. "I have 2 other options. I can leave Busan with Michelle tonight and rebuild somewhere else, which I'm capable of doing." He said this without drama, because it was simply true. "Or I can tell you what you asked for, the actual version." Su-Yan set her folder down. She folded her hands on the table. "I'm listening," she said. He told her. Not all of it, but enough. The alley and the rain, the baby who weighed almost nothing and looked at him like he was something worth trusting, his own wounds, which he did not explain, the frantic, stumbling, entirely graceless first weeks of feeding her and holding her, and learning that a man who controlled billion-dollar criminal enterprises was completely helpless in the face of a screaming infant. The way she smiled at him, the first real smile, and how something cracked in his chest that had been sealed shut for a long time. The decision to keep her, the fear that came with it. Dr. Yuna, who loved Michelle honestly and died for it. The documents and why they were imperfect, and what he had tried and failed to correct. He did not say, "I was the most feared criminal in Seoul." He did not say, "The empire I built on violence and death." He did not say, "The men who wanted to use my daughter to break me are the smallest part of why I am sitting here." He said, "I found a child who was dying, and I could not leave her. Everything I have done since is an attempt to be worthy of the fact that she is alive." When he finished, the restaurant was very quiet. The street outside had gone to its nighttime murmur, the distant city, the ordinary sound of life proceeding. Su-Yan had not moved. She had not written anything. "The man who built the false documentation," she said finally, "is he still in your life?" "Yes." "Can he fix the gap properly?" Minho looked at her. "Not without creating a paper trail that puts Michelle at risk from people who would use her the same way they tried to before." Su-Yan absorbed this. She turned her teacup in her hands. "The people who took her before," she said carefully, "are they still—" "No," Minho said. "They're not a factor anymore." "But others like them might be." "Yes." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he stopped trying to read her expression, because he couldn't, and because he had made a decision not to calculate, and he intended to hold to it. "I need to think," she said finally. She stood. She picked up her smaller folder and she paused with her hand on it, not looking at him. "Mr. Kim," a beat. "What you just did, telling me this, was not in your interest, legally or otherwise." "No," he agreed. "Why did you do it?" He looked at the window. Outside, the street. Inside, 2 cups of tea and the remains of an honesty that had cost him more than he had been sure he could afford. "Because she deserved to have someone tell the truth for her," he said, "even if it costs me everything. She's already lost too much to people who chose themselves." Su-Yan stood with that for a moment. Then she walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. She did not turn around. "I'll be in touch within the week," she said. "Don't leave Busan." She left. Minho sat alone in the restaurant for a long time. He was not sure what had just happened. He was not sure if he had saved them or ended them. He had told a government official enough truth to undo everything he had built, and she had walked out without telling him what she would do with it. He thought, "I don't know if that was brave or foolish." And then he thought,
Michelle would say it was brave. She is 2 years old, and she is never wrong about the things that matter. He turned off the lights and went to get his daughter.
4 days passed without word from Suyan. Min-ho ran the restaurant. He fed Michelle. He built block towers and knocked them down and rebuilt them. He read the 3 books she always demanded at bedtime, the bear one, the one with the yellow duck, and a book about vegetables that she found inexplicably compelling and that Min-ho had read aloud so many times he could recite it without looking. He sat on the floor of her yellow bedroom after she was asleep, as he often did, and he held the uncertainty of the week inside him like something physical. On the second day, Mrs. Han came for afternoon tea, which had become a fixture he'd stopped trying to decline. She brought rice cakes. Michelle ate 3 and tried to give one to the cat through the back door, which the cat accepted with the dignity of an animal accustomed to tribute. Mrs. Han watched Min-ho over her tea and said nothing about whatever she saw in his face. This was one of the things he valued most about her. She saw things clearly and did not always require them to be spoken. On the third day, Kang Jun called, not through the forum, the phone, direct, which meant something had moved. Jaiwan reached out to me, Kang Jun said, on his own. Min-ho set down the knife he'd been using to prep for the lunch service. Why? He found out about the welfare investigation through his cousin, not what she knew, just that there was one, and that it concerned a child named Michelle and a man in Busan. A pause. He put it together. He remembered your name, not from the organization. He was too low level. He remembered it because you let him walk away clean when you didn't have to. He says he's never forgotten that. What does he want to do? He wants to speak to the social worker himself, not to lie, he made that clear, to confirm, as a witness to your character, that the man who gave him that exit 8 years ago was capable of an act of unearned mercy, that it fits a pattern. Min-ho was quiet. Outside the restaurant window, Busan went about its morning. A woman walked a small dog. 2 schoolchildren passed arguing about something. The cat sat on the step in the sun. He'd be making himself visible to people who might remember him. He knows. He says the debt is his to decide how to pay. Min-ho thought about what Kang Jun had said in the Jajangmyeon restaurant. Trust that a woman who chose this work might be capable of understanding. He thought about Suyan's face in the doorway, the careful neutrality of it, and the small thing that had moved underneath. Tell him I said no. Tell him the debt was paid the moment he didn't look back. Silence on the line. Then, boss. The old title. Min-ho closed his eyes briefly. Tell him thank you, and tell him to stay out of it. This is mine to carry. He hung up. He went back to prep. He worked through the lunch service with the focused economy of a man who has made a decision and intends to hold it. On the evening of the 4th day, Suyeon called. I'd like to meet tomorrow morning, she said, at the restaurant before you open, 8 o'clock. I'll be there, he said. A pause, then carefully, the way people spoke when they were saying something that was not quite within the borders of their professional role. Bring Michelle. He did not know what that meant. He hoped. He had been wrong about hope before. He had built an entire second life on hope and watched it almost get his daughter killed. But he had also watched his daughter hand him a broken yellow crayon with the complete confidence that it was a gift worth giving. And he had learned, slowly and against all his instincts, that hope was not always the same thing as foolishness. He put Michelle to bed that night. He read the bear book and the duck book and the vegetable book. She fell asleep in the middle of the third one hand still curled around the ear of her stuffed rabbit, her breathing going slow and even. Tomorrow, he told her, we're going to find out if I did the right thing. She breathed in, out. He turned off the light. He went to bed. For the first time in 4 days, he slept. He was at the restaurant by 6, not 5:30 as usual, 6. He had spent the extra half hour the way he spent the extra half hour of most consequential mornings, sitting at the edge of Michelle's bed while she slept, not touching her, just watching the rise and fall of her breathing. She had kicked the blanket off. He pulled it back up. She made a small sound, not waking, just acknowledging the semi-conscious communication of a child who knows exactly where safe is and remains oriented to it even in sleep. He had made breakfast for her at the restaurant. She liked eating there on special days, had appointed herself head inspector of the kitchen, and took the role seriously. He had brought her favorite cup, the yellow one with the rabbit on it. He had set it on the counter behind the bar where she would see it immediately. He had also, this morning, taken the letter from the drawer, the brown envelope with yellowed tape, and put it in his jacket pocket. Not to show Suyan, not to read himself, just to carry. He wasn't entirely sure why, except that it felt like the right weight to have on him today. Michelle arrived with the energy of someone who had slept 10 hours and considered that more than adequate preparation for whatever the day intended. She assessed the restaurant. She assessed the yellow cup. She assessed Min Ho. "Special day," she informed him. "Yes," he said. "Egg?" she asked. "Egg," he confirmed. He made her scrambled eggs. She ate them at table 2, the window table, the one he had chosen for Suyan's visit, and pointed out things on the street outside with the commentating precision of someone who considered the world a performance staged for her benefit. Dog, bike, old man hat. At 7:45, Min Ho's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, expecting Kong Jun or a supplier, or Suyan confirming she was on her way. Unknown number. He picked it up. He answered the way he always answered unknown numbers, with silence, waiting. For a moment there was nothing on the other end, not dead air, breathing, someone collecting themselves. Then a voice. He had not heard that voice in 25 years. He had last heard it the morning his family was taken from him, a morning he had replayed 10,000 times across 2.5 decades of nightmares, trying to identify the moment it went wrong, the moment he had failed to see what was coming. A voice he had believed since then was gone from the world entirely, silenced with everything else he had loved, before he learned that love was a liability. Min Ho Ya. The Korean diminutive, the one only family used, the one only she had ever said to him exactly that way, with that exact weight of history and grief, and something that had survived everything and was somehow, impossibly, still on the other end of a phone call in a small Busan restaurant at 7:45 in the morning. He sat down. He did not remember doing it. He was simply sitting. "Amma?" he whispered. At table 2, Michelle had stopped pointing at things on the street. She was watching him with the absolute attentiveness of a small child who has registered a change in the air. The voice on the phone drew a breath. In it, 25 years. "Min Ho Ya, The window shattered. Not slowly, not with warning. Glass across the floor, across the counter, across the table where Michelle sat. A sound like a gunshot, because it was a gunshot, 2 of them, the unmistakable double crack of a rifle, and Min Ho was already moving, already across the room before the second echo, his body doing what 20 years had trained it to do regardless of what the rest of him had decided to become. He reached Michelle in less than 2 seconds. She was frozen, not hurt, not touched. The shots had gone high, a warning or a miss. Her face, the face of a child who did not yet have language for what had just happened, but whose eyes were very wide and very fixed on him. "Appa," she said, barely a sound. He swept her up. His other hand moved to his jacket, the locked box above the refrigerator, the gun he had checked every night, the thing he had hoped never to need again. It was not here. He had not brought it. He had decided this morning that today was not a day for the person who needed a gun. He had been wrong. The phone was still in his hand. On the other end of the line, the voice, his mother's voice, the voice of the dead who were apparently not dead, was saying his name, over and over. "Min Ho! Min Ho!" He pressed himself against the wall beside the window, Michelle against his chest, her face buried in his neck, her hands gripping his shirt with both small fists. Silence outside. The street had emptied. Busan's ordinary morning, ordinary no more. He put the phone to his ear. "I'm here," he said. His voice was steady, the steadiness of 20 years. "Minho, listen to me." His mother's voice was urgent now, not the composed opening of someone who had rehearsed a call. Something had changed. "They know where you are. I tried to get to you first. I tried—" "Who?" he said, not a question. A beat, the weight of what she was about to say pressed through the phone like something physical. "The people who took your family," she said. "Minho, it wasn't a rival organization. It was never a rival. It was—" The back door of the restaurant opened. To be continued. He had built a quiet life from the ruins of a violent one. He had learned to make rice porridge and tie small shoes and accept a broken yellow crayon as the gift it was. He had told the truth to a woman who had every reason not to believe him. He had chosen, every morning for 2 years, to be the man his daughter already believed he was. And it had almost been enough. Almost. Because the past does not disappear when you walk away from it. It waits. It is patient in the way that only grief and consequence can be patient. And when it comes back carrying the things you thought were gone. The voices of the dead who are not dead. The truth of the history you were told and have lived inside without knowing it was a lie. Park Min-ho held his daughter against his chest in a restaurant full of broken glass, in a city that was supposed to be safe, with a phone against his ear and the back door of his life swinging open. The quiet was over, but this time, for the first time, he would not face what came through that door alone. If this story has stayed with you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Part 3, the final chapter, is coming. Join our membership for early access, extended scenes, and exclusive content that goes deeper into the world of Min-ho and Michelle. And leave a comment below. Do you think his mother is truly on his side, or is she the most dangerous person in this story? Until Part 3, keep believing that the things that break us are not always the things that end us. Silent Speaks Stories, where every story leaves a mark.